Welcome to the video on best practices for mobile application development. My name is Mike Kirkup and I'm going to be the person who's going to walk you through this today. It's important to understand the different design considerations when it comes to developing a mobile application today. First and foremost, you need to understand the nature of the mobile user. They're going to have anytime, anywhere access to the application, which is very different than a traditional PC environment. Similarly, they're going to have a very kind of immediate need for information. What we mean by that is that a lot of the work from a mobile device is action oriented. So it's either responding to a notification or acting on a specific thing that you need to accomplish. So if you need to order parts or communicate or contact with somebody, you're going to pull out your BlackBerry and want to accomplish that and then typically put it back in its holster or your pocket or whatever. And then you also have to understand what the different specific data requirements are for a mobile user versus a standard kind of PC user. As well, you need to understand the nature of the mobile device. So there are certainly limitations. There's screen size and input limitations. It's not a full keyboard. It's not a full screen. The resolution is significantly smaller. There's going to be memory and processor limitations that you're going to want to deal with as well. Wireless bandwidth and coverage limitations that your application needs to properly handle. And certainly last but not least, battery life. And it's important to understand that all of the different pieces above, access to data, memory and processor use, wireless bandwidth, size of this screen and input, and how you use those and leverage those as part of the user experience will all have an impact on battery life. Okay, so minimizing and providing the simplest yet most effective application experience on the device is fundamentally what will offer you the best battery life, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the following slides. So functionally, you have to understand the network communication, user interface, data storage, and then application logic, and we'll walk through those each individually. The best wireless solution today uses wireless the least. And it seems like a somewhat contradictory statement, but it's absolutely bang on true. And what we mean by that is that you only want to send data that's necessary to the device. You don't want to send data that the user isn't going to act on. And similarly worded, but very different, you only want to send data when necessary. Okay, so understanding that there are going to be pieces of information that the user is going to leverage on the device, and that they're only going to leverage that at certain times. Okay, so as a perfect example, if you're pushing weather information down to the device and the user turns off their device at 11 o'clock as part of their auto on-off timer, and then it turns it back on at 7 o'clock in the morning. At 7 o'clock in the morning when the device turns on, there's no sense in sending them the weather update from 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and so on all the way through the night because it's already done. Right? The reality of the situation is that by 7 o'clock, the only weather they want to see is the 7 o'clock weather forecast. Okay? So understanding when you need to send data and understanding what data you need to send are very important points. And again, we talk about information that you can send down the device, we're talking about push. So leveraging the ability from a very efficient networking and battery perspective to push the important updates to the device rather than having the device wake up and using a pull-based architecture to determine, is there data available for me that I need to use? And certainly, very important, having context-sensitive applications. And what we mean by that is building an application that takes into consideration the different ways that the users are going to leverage that. So, one of the ways might be, again, if a notification occurs when the person pulls the device out of the holster, acting on the fact that, hey, they want to act on the notification. Let's show them why we notify them. Okay? So, very context sensitive. From an effective user experience, it's absolutely important to understand that the user experience will drive adoption across the board. And whether that's you as an independent software vendor who's trying to come up with an application that you can sell to users, or it's you as a corporate developer who's trying to roll out a different way for processes and so on within your organization, the user experience is absolutely key. So you have to understand as part of that, what are the limitations of the device or the device screen or the input mechanisms that you need to take into consideration for your application. Some of the tips that we usually provide are, don't try to exactly emulate the desktop. It doesn't make sense. Right? The same way that you wouldn't want to see a BlackBerry screen blown up on a full monitor and full screen for usage is the same reason that you don't want to take what's sitting on your desktop screen and exactly port it down to your BlackBerry. You want to be consistent and predictable throughout your entire application, and be consistent and predictable in accordance with what the BlackBerry does today. So leverage some of the best practices within the BlackBerry application. So drop-down menus, checkboxes, when to use them, when not, option screens, all of those things that users are going to be familiar with. Don't give the user too many options or too much information at once. Okay, so if you're starting to see that your menus are, 30 or 40 different items, it's time to really break that off into separate screens and make it seamless and easier for the user to navigate that. And again, remember the nature of the wireless user. They're not going to be sitting there staring at their wireless device for 8 hours or 6 or 12 hours at a time. They're looking at the device for a very specific reason, an action-oriented philosophy that you need to take into consideration. When it comes to storing data on the smartphone, memory can certainly be very limited. There's going to be, more and more memory available on wireless devices with expandable memory slots and so on, but the reality of the situation is that no matter how much data the device will be able to store, it'll still ultimately be considered limited. So don't store everything on the device if you don't need it. BlackBerry smartphones are frequently connected, and that's something that you can really leverage with the wireless connection to pull down the data that you don't need all the time when you actually need it. Okay, and so a perfect example would be email, where you store all of the email that they recently received, but provide the ability to go back and search their large or kind of remote mailbox to determine, okay, well, here's some mail that I might need or want. Okay, store the most used and most frequently accessed data, and that really comes back to that fundamental piece that we talked a little bit about earlier from a networking perspective. And again, remember the nature of the smartphone itself. So the fact that it is intended to be a smaller carry with you type of device. It's not intended to be a replacement for your PC that's going to hold a 200 gigabyte database of all the different contacts and information that you have. From an application logic perspective, certainly you want to be optimizing your code for both speed and size. That's going to be very important. From a browser application perspective, you want to look at how you might be using some of the scripting languages like JavaScript and how you can leverage those but not drastically and negatively impact the experience of the user. From a Java application perspective, certainly consider which business logic should run on the client and which should run on the server. And the ability to offload a lot of the capability to the server is going to provide a better user experience in a lot of cases. Because again, you have to understand that the server has a power cord plugged into the wall. The server contains a full running CPU and huge amount of memory and RAM and so on. So again, understanding how you can leverage the server to provide a better experience on the device. And for BlackBerry MDS runtime applications, the runtime provides a lot of container services, so leveraging those within your application. And with that, I want to thank you very much for your time today, and we would appreciate your feedback on what you think of the video. Thank you.